Hi, my name is Emilie Feve. I am a rising junior here at CU studying mechanical engineering, and here are some climate change resistant agricultural methods and crops. I chose to research this topic because I work at Whole Foods, and a customer was asking for cherries, but we had to tell her the crop had failed due to a cold winter. Seeing food insecurity in my own life is quite terrifying, and I wanted to do something about it. So from that, I am arguing that as climate change continues to affect our nation more and more, our agriculture is suffering greatly. We need to step up and change how we farm, so hopefully no one ever has to face food insecurity. If we don't make a change, farmers will be out of work, land and livestock will be lost, and most terrifyingly, we won't have a way to sustain life. Why this is an issue. The US's intensive agricultural model is already highly flawed, neglects soil, lacks biodiversity, and it relies on fertilizer and other harmful chemicals and pesticides. This already puts our agricultural system at risk without even factoring in climate change. Climate change has already reduced our agricultural income by 25%. I will now show you how climate change is affecting our agriculture. Number 1, trapped heat due to greenhouse gases. There is too much heat trapped, causing unsuitable conditions for growing crops as they cannot adapt quick enough. The temperatures are rising by 0.32 degrees Fahrenheit per decade, which may not seem like a lot, but this adds up quickly when the crops are extremely fragile. We are seeing more extreme heat and fewer cool days during winter. We are also seeing more frequent cold season thaws. Our crops are extremely fragile and cannot withstand these rising temperatures. Here is a prediction with 2 models showing how many hot days we will see in the future. The number is drastically increasing and our crops cannot survive. Number 2, changing precipitation patterns. Rainfall patterns have been changing across the US. Below shows a prediction of the change in precipitation we will face, whether that be droughts or too much rain. Again, our crops cannot handle these changes. Number 3, increased natural disasters. We are seeing more flooding, more droughts, more changes in crop and livestock viability, new pests, pathogens, and weeds, and degraded soil. With the flooding, we are seeing an increase in frequency, intensity, and it has been accelerating our soil erosion and polluting our water systems as the pesticides we are using on the plants is being carried by the floods. With the droughts, we are seeing rising temperatures, which makes the droughts worse, and it has been depleting our water supplies, which all crops need. For changes in crop and livestock viability, as the conditions change, chosen livestock and plants for prior conditions suffer. So if we have a plant that likes to live in the cold and we are facing droughts and increased temperatures, those plants can't live anymore. And as temperatures change across the US, weeds that used to once be in an area move to others to find comfort. So if we have a weed in California that likes the hot, but now it's too dry in California now, those weeds are moving to, say, Colorado, where it's still warm, but we're not facing a drought. And those farmers aren't used to the weeds, so those are depleting our crops. And with the degraded soil, we now have to rely on more fertilizer and more maintenance, which is hard on the farmers and the land. And the results are reduced water holding capacity and increased erosion and pollution. So, what does climate resilient agriculture actually mean? It's an approach to agriculture which takes in mind sustainability and longevity. These techniques use already existing natural resources like crops and livestock to achieve long-term income and productivity under ever-changing climate conditions. So here's what we can do. Number one, we can pick tolerant crops and livestock for our ever-changing conditions. This means they adapt quickly and can withstand change. For livestock, indigenous species to areas are adapting to an ecosystem and can survive their natural disasters such as droughts or floods or low-quality food and are resistant to diseases. Although these indigenous species yield less meat or dairy, they are better for the climate and they are better with climate resiliency due to high adaptability. For crops, patterns of droughts require different crops, and some crops that I found that are highly resistant were quinoa, which is a miracle crop, and it can withstand desert conditions and droughts, and seawater for irrigation. I also found sea asparagus, which can live in deserts and be irrigated purely by seawater. This is very important because we are facing more droughts and less pure water, but we have a lot of seawater to use, so this is a great crop to use. There's also chickpea and pigeon pea, which can withstand severe drought and yield 25% more than indigenous species in the study done in India. They also have a very early maturing age, which is important when we face uncertain changing temperatures and weather patterns. If we can cultivate those crops quickly, that's important because we will face less food insecurity. We can also use a gene bank. Right now, only 150 of the possible 30,000 edible plant species are being utilized. Using a gene bank collects seeds and screens them to collect important data, like their ideal growing parameters. I found 11 gene banks that are conserving 736,210 species of cereals, grains, different crops like corn and bananas. And those gene banks distribute to 160 countries, which is almost the whole entire world. And those screens that are collected for the seeds are important because they only send out the seeds that will grow in the temperatures that they need. They were first designed for desert climates, but with climate change, this is resembling many more environments now. We can also use nuclear techniques. Nuclear and related techniques can be used in addition to GMOs to induce variability in crops, so they can become more hardy and withstand drought, salinity, and pests. Nuclear techniques can be applied to characterize genetic makeup of indigenous species and local species to combine the efficiency and tolerance to disease. They also help determine spread of pests for preparedness and rapid response for the farmers. I found 4 examples of these nuclear techniques. One of them is carbon-13, which is used to find crop residue in soil, which helps the degraded soil gain fertility and minimizes the erosion. I also found nitrogen-15, which finds the extent of atmospheric nitrogen captured by crops and the contribution of nitrogen fertilizers that are found in that crop. And lastly, I researched gamma rays and X-rays, which are used to sterilize pests to be released into pest management programs, which is like a vaccine for the crops, and it can create mutant crops variants that are resistant to those said pests. Here are some images of nuclear testing being used in tomatoes. We can use programs to aid our agriculture. 2 different examples I found were, the first one is modeling system for agricultural impacts of climate change. And that is an online simulation, kind of like VR for crops, that helps countries carry out climate change impact assessment of crops and livestock. This is very helpful to predict weather patterns and changes so that countries can act before it happens. There's also GLEAM, which is Global Livestock Environmental assessment model, which analyzes multiple environmental impact categories like land use and degradation, nutrient and water use, and the interaction with biodiversity. This helps make important decisions and changes on agriculture. Usually, people see agriculture as mostly plants, but livestock is also a very important aspect of that. GLEAM simulates biophysical processes along livestock supply chains. And the whole entire goal of GLEAM is quantifying use of natural resources in livestock sector and identifying impacts of livestock on environment in order to adapt to a more suitable livestock sector that can withstand climate change. These programs are a resource for governments, companies, and farmers. There are so many more that I found that I couldn't include in this slideshow as well. And lastly, we can make changes to policies. Governments have a lot of power and voice, so here are ways that they can help their people. They can invest in research opportunities, which would then provide farmers with tools needed to maximize efficiency and productivity. Farmers need research more than ever to help them predict climate change patterns and help them react. If the government would boost funding for these research opportunities, the farmers could prevent their crops from dying out. The government can also expand conservation, which would make it easier for farmers to be sustainable and makes their farms climate resistant. This goes along with the first point, but is more the physical. The first one is more the change that we would need to make. And then based off the research that they find, they can change their farms to be more resilient and have their crops live longer. And lastly, the farmers need safety nets like crop insurance and disaster relief. If all else fails and we do experience crop failures, the farmers need a way to be able to live after that. So that is what these safety nets are. For me, this is one of the most important changes, in my opinion, as they have much more power. The government has a lot of power to influence others. If they make a change, others are way more likely to follow in their footsteps. So, whether you are a major food company, a farmer, or just a home gardener, climate change is affecting us all. If we don't change our techniques, food insecurity will become an issue for everyone. To keep food a stable source, above are some ways that we can still grow food with our ever-changing conditions. From small changes like different hardier crops to large changes like using programs and nuclear testing, any changes we make will positively affect the human food supply. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.